Imagine returning home after many years away, expecting to see the vast 3,600-acre lake that had belonged to your family for generations, only to discover that it had completely disappeared, gone without a trace. In its place stood a lifeless grid of luxury houses, perfect lawns trimmed to precision, and freshly laid asphalt roads. This nightmare was a reality that awaited David, a hydrologist who had devoted his entire career to studying the very thing that had now been taken from him, water. The shock struck him deeply. The sparkling blue lake he had grown up beside, the center of his family's history and pride, had been transformed into a dry valley filled with development. The question burned in his mind: how could something so enormous simply vanish? The explanation, frustratingly, was as simple as it was outrageous. The new Homeowners Association, or HOA, had sold the water rights. They had drained the entire lake, an enormous project fueled by engineering ambition and pure greed, and built an upscale housing community directly on the exposed lake bed. It was a bold and shameless act, a symbol of profit placed above heritage and nature. When David first tried to confront the HOA and reason with them, he was met with nothing but cold legal language and smug indifference. They shoved contracts and documents in front of him, pointing to obscure clauses and technical loopholes that conveniently erased his family's history. To them, David was merely a nuisance, a remnant of a past they had already buried beneath concrete and pavement. But David was far more than an angry descendant. He was a scientist. He understood the land, the water, and the history of the valley in ways the developers never could. Instead of digging into the soil, he began digging into the past. In the dusty attic of his family's old homestead, now overlooking the sterile new neighborhood, he began searching through forgotten boxes and records. That was where he discovered them: the journals of his great-great-grandfather, the original settler who had built the lake generations ago. Page after page revealed careful observations, sketches of surrounding hills, and intricate engineering diagrams that went far beyond the work of an ordinary farmer. His ancestor had not simply worked the land. He had been a brilliant and visionary engineer. Not only had he constructed the main dam that everyone in the region knew about, but he had also anticipated a time when the lake might need protection. Within the journals were warnings, notes about respecting the immense power of the water, and references to a hidden fail-safe system. The HOA, in their rush to develop the land, had dismissed such ideas as nothing more than local myths, stories meant to frighten children. They had trusted the official surveys, but ignored the handwritten history hidden in fading ink and cryptic sketches. David studied every page carefully, and eventually he found what he needed: a trail of clues pointing toward a secret location. According to the journals, there was a concealed control room built deep within the bedrock of surrounding hills, entirely separate from the modern dam controls that the HOA had already dismantled. His ancestor had designed a secondary system, purely mechanical, made up of underground valves and channels powered by gravity and natural pressure. It was a system so cleverly hidden that no modern survey equipment would ever detect it. This was the key. The HOA had drained the lake using the obvious, visible infrastructure. They had never discovered the true heart of the system, the original controls sleeping far beneath the earth. To them, the lake was nothing more than an empty basin. But to David, it was a sleeping giant waiting to awaken. Armed with his ancestors' knowledge and his own expertise in hydrology, David began searching for the hidden entrance. The journals led him on a strange scavenger hunt across the property as he decoded landmarks described in the old sketches: distinctive rock formations, 3 ancient oak trees standing together, and an unusual dip along the ridgeline. Finally, behind a thick curtain of tangled ivy and a cleverly concealed rock face, he found it: a heavy iron door, rusted with age but still solid. When he forced it open, stale air drifted out, carrying the scent of damp earth and 100 years of silence. Using a small hand-crank generator to power a single work light, David stepped inside and descended into the darkness. The tunnels beneath the hills were a masterpiece of old-world engineering. Cool, silent passageways stretched through the stone as he followed the directions in the journal, carefully navigating the twisting labyrinth. Eventually, he reached the center of it all, the control room. The sight felt like stepping into the pages of a Jules Verne novel. The vast chamber was filled with enormous cast-iron wheels polished brass levers and rows of pressure gauges, all resting beneath a thin layer of dust. This was the secret legacy his ancestor had left behind. Proof of remarkable foresight. David spent hours carefully inspecting the ancient machinery. He compared the journal notes with his own scientific calculations, examining the seals, checking pressure tolerances, and studying the flow mechanics. Everything had been built to endure. The system was entirely analog, simple, durable, and brilliantly designed. Meanwhile, above ground, the HOA believed they had won. That very evening, they were holding a lavish outdoor gala in the central plaza of their brand-new development. Residents dressed in formal attire mingled across the plaza, which happened to sit at the deepest point of the old lake bed. Champagne glasses clinked as they celebrated their investment in prime real estate. They were, quite literally, dancing on the history of David's family. Deep underground, as the party reached its peak, David took a slow breath. He placed his hands on the largest iron wheel in the chamber, a valve-marked primary sluice gate. It was now or never. With a deep grunt of effort, he began turning the wheel. The metal groaned loudly after a century of stillness, the echo rolling through the stone chamber. One by one, he moved through the room, opening additional valves, redirecting ancient water channels, and awakening the dormant system. He wasn't just turning machinery. He was turning back time. At first, nothing changed on the surface. The celebration continued, completely unaware. Then a groundskeeper noticed something unusual. A small puddle began forming near an old culvert at the edge of the neighborhood. He shrugged it off as a leaking sprinkler system. But moments later another puddle appeared, and then another. Soon thin streams of water started emerging from cracks in ground, from old drainage pipes the developers had ignored, and even from the soil itself. The ancient system was awakening. The water wasn't flowing from the dam. It was rising from below. It traveled through the hidden network of channels his great-great-grandfather had built long ago, the lake's own underground circulation system coming back to life. Guests at the party began to notice. One woman gasped as the heel of her shoe suddenly sank into soft, wet soil. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd as the trickles turned into flowing streams that wound between the immaculate houses. Slowly but relentlessly, the water level began to rise. The carefully maintained lawns transformed into muddy marshland. Newly paved streets became shallow canals. Panic spread as residents realized what was happening. The HOA president, his face twisted with disbelief and fury, shouted into his phone demanding answers from the dam operators. The response came back quickly. Nothing was wrong with the dam. The water was coming from everywhere and nowhere. As chaos erupted across the valley, David climbed out a hidden entrance on the hillside and watched the scene unfold below. He hadn't unleashed a violent flood. He had simply restarted the process of refilling the lake, exactly as his ancestor had designed. The water was slowly reclaiming the land that had always belonged to it. The foundations of multi-million-dollar homes now stood in the middle of a rapidly growing pond. A confrontation had begun. On one side stood the corrupt HOA with their lawyers and their collapsing real estate empire. On the other stood a single hydrologist, armed with his ancestors' knowledge and the unstoppable force of nature itself. The lake was returning, and as the water continued to rise, so did the promise of justice for a legacy that had been stolen, but never truly lost. The battle was far from finished, but the tide had quite literally turned.